It's time once again for our weekly chat with South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on KWAT, and lots to talk about again as the legislative session continues out in Pierre. First of all, Governor, I wanted to touch on the topic of these child care grants. It's my understanding that about $32 million will be doled out to child care providers across the state, but there seems to be a difference of opinion on the path that needs to be followed to get that money into those child care providers' hands. You say you have the authority to do that, but some Democrats in the legislature have a different opinion. Can you clear that up for us?
Well, it's not really Democrats. It's more the leadership in the House, as far as the Speaker and the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, that are questioning the authority. And all we are pointing to is that they granted that authority in last year's budgeting process. So for most people, what they don't know about the state government is that if it's general funds, if it's state dollars, so the legislature appropriates and says where they're going to spend those dollars. They say what program, how it's going to be spent, and how it goes. When federal grants come into the state, they give me, the executive branch, the authority to spend those grants. So they don't specifically talk about how it gets spent, what the program looks like. They give me the authority to spend how that grant comes in. And a lot of times how that grant looks is dictated by the federal government, what the Treasury says and how we have to spend it. So that's what these daycare grants are. They are federal dollars that came to the Department of Social Services that could be used for child care. And for the last 6 months, legislators have been telling us we've got a child care problem out in the state, and I know that we do because I've met with hundreds of people who are challenged by finding people to watch their kids so they can go back to their jobs after COVID, and I've got daycare providers that have gone out of business because of challenges with keeping kiddos in their buildings and keeping them safe. And so over and over again, the legislators kept telling me you need to prioritize child care. And we had these grant dollars, and we immediately wanted to get them out to child care providers and use the federal authority that they gave us in last year's budget to spend it. What I think legislators, the Speaker and the Chair of Appropriations don't understand is that that they granted that authority in last year's budget. We've shown that to them, but they still want to go back and open up last year's budget and put their stamp of approval on it again.
Kristi, as you talk to moms and dads of young children out there, do you hear stories about these parents having trouble finding child care? And if that's the case, how do we fix that?
Well, we had a lot of daycares go out of business during COVID. Kids stayed home with their families, and if daycare providers couldn't keep their kids there and paying, to cash flow, a lot of them closed. And then there's a lot of them that maybe didn't close yet, but they were having challenges. So yes, those that want to go back to work, maybe their provider isn't there anymore, or their provider's rates are higher to make sure they can provide it. And families are incredibly challenged by it. So we had almost over 600 applications for these grants that came in from different state daycares that are registered about they needed some help. They qualified under the Treasury guidance, and we wanted to send those payments out. Just the legislature, as far as the House leadership team, was questioning whether we could do that without their stamp of approval. So that's really just it's not that they're not needed, and it's not that everybody doesn't agree that it's a priority and it needs to go. It was more confusion over, can I send it without the legislature telling me specifically to send it?
You've never been a fan of vaccine mandates, Governor, and there's a bill making its way through the legislature that would exempt employees in South Dakota from any employer vaccine mandates. Can you explain a little bit about that bill and why you're supportive of that?
Well, what the bill says is that employers have to honor medical exemptions, religious exemptions, and natural immunity. If they're going to require vaccines to employ somebody, then they have to give those exemptions. That's in the state law. It's a requirement at the federal level as well. And this bill specifically says and defines what a religious, medical, and natural immunity exemption is in regards to the COVID-19 virus. So I think a lot of people, we saw employers deny those opportunities or call into question an employee's ability to exercise for those exemptions, and we want to make sure that they are honored.
One thing we've talked about in previous conversations, Governor, is critical race theory. I'd like to circle back and have you explain exactly what critical race theory is. And it's being talked about in the legislature, and the debate seems to be whether over these decisions on what should or should not be taught in public schools should be a local school board decision. Can you touch on that for me, please?
Well, critical race theory is racism. It is teaching someone that they're better than someone else based on their sex, their religion, or the color of their skin. And we don't want that in our classrooms. We don't want to divide people by telling them some people are better than others, or that they are guilty because of something their ancestors did. And so preventing critical race theory in our schools is incredibly important. We want to make sure that our kids understand history and the mistakes made in the past, but also recognize that they can do better in the future, and that they're not necessarily themselves individually guilty because of what those ancestors did and how they conducted themselves. So this is a guideline for our schools to follow. I think that the local school boards will still have an incredible role in decision-making over curriculum, but this will ensure that we have a true and honest history taught and that we aren't using racism to promote an agenda in our classrooms. It'll be on the Senate floor today for a vote, and so I'm hopeful it'll get supported and passed. We had a great committee hearing, and I'm hoping this bill will get signed into law by the end of session.
Well, the legislators and the appropriators out in Pierre, Governor, they rely on revenue estimates to sort of formulate their spending decisions. Two-part question here. Are we due to see some new revenue estimates come out? And secondly, how important are they based on the fact that we've got so much federal funding to spend as well?
Well, yes, revenue numbers are out this week, and they are good. There are also revenue numbers for the last month that we are looking at and putting into the budget, not, indicative of what we're going to see for the next year as far as budgeting. So we use a lot of economists to decide what the next year is going to look like and how we budget. There is a desire by the House appropriators to spend a lot more money than what I think we should be doing. And one of the things that they're talking about is to plus up. It's been pretty candid conversations. They want to plus up revenue numbers so they can cut sales tax, which I'm always in favor of reducing taxes. I'm just very concerned that their revenue numbers are not realistic. They're anticipating a lot of growth in our state still, and I think with the outside factors we see with inflation, interest rates, we put 9 times the amount of federal stimulus into our economy that we did back in 2010. And if everybody remembers, we had a lot of stimulus dollars coming into the state in 2010 after the housing crash. And then 2 years later, the state was forced to make 10% budget cuts because they spent a lot of dollars. Then all of a sudden, those federal dollars were gone, and it dramatically hit every program in the state. So I don't want to repeat that. I don't want to be back here in a year or two making huge, dramatic cuts to programs. I just want to be conservative in how we approach our revenue, recognizing that policies from the federal level are going to slow down South Dakota's growth, and that we make sure we're making the right decisions as far as being responsible to the taxpayers.
Governor, I know you've talked about how South Dakota is an energy-dependent state. We're isolated. When we go to doctor appointments, maybe grocery shopping, things like that, we have to drive some distance to get there. With that in mind, at the time of this recording, gas prices in Watertown went up another 15 cents a gallon overnight. We're now at $3.50 a gallon. A lot of talk about $4 a gallon gas possible by Memorial Day as crude oil prices climb toward $100 a barrel. I want to play a quick comment from Senator John Thune regarding energy dependence, and then get your reaction to what Senator Thune had to say on a teletown hall meeting last week. Here's Senator John Thune.
Under the previous administration, we literally were on our way to energy independence. We were a net exporter. We were actually exporting fuel out of America to other countries around the world. Well, this new administration came into power, has killed all these energy projects, including the Keystone XL pipeline, but also a lot of energy production. And as a consequence, we're now turning to hat in hand to Saudi Arabia and OPEC countries to try and encourage them to increase their production.
Any reaction, Governor, on what Senator Thune had to say there?
Well, it's not rocket science. I mean, that's one of the reasons when people ask me why I campaigned so hard for President Trump, we knew exactly what Biden was going to do when he got into office, and he's done it. So, yeah, he took away America's independence by now relying on our enemies to supply us with our energy, and we're seeing it every day here in South Dakota. So elections have consequences, and it matters who's in the White House. We are suffering now because President Biden's in the office, and yeah, there's nothing on there that I disagree with that Senator Thune has said as far as the consequences of the last election. We're just going to have to do what we can to shore up ourselves and make wise decisions to withstand it until we get somebody different in charge of this country. But, you know, I was driving around Pierre here running some errands at about 5 this morning, too, and I watched every gas station changing their gas prices, too, and I was thinking about all these families that just are going to struggle. That extra 15 cents a gallon is 15, you know, that's a real $5 to $10 every time they fill their vehicle to go, you know, less money they have to eat out, less chance they have to go buy their kids new basketball shoes or new track shoes, or it's a real impact on what people do every single day, and it's unfortunate. We can't sit here and just, you know, place blame on Biden because we knew he'd do it if he got in there. We tried to keep him out, or at least I did, and I think that now we do all we can to make sure that South Dakota is as strong and as secure as possible and be wise so we can withstand a lot of what's going on with our energy policy.
Yeah, you look at inflation numbers, they're the highest they've been in 40-plus years. Groceries have gotten very expensive. Gas prices are going up. I think, Governor, when you're out meeting with people around South Dakota, you're going to hear talk about people with very thin margins and not a lot of discretionary dollars to spend, how tight things are getting out there. Is this an issue that Congress would need to deal with, or is there anything that can be done at the state level?
Well, we got to be smart in what we're doing here at the state level. I mean, we're certainly pushing back on a lot of what federal government's doing. I've got several federal lawsuits pushing back on their mandates, their regulations that I don't believe they have the authority to do. All of those mandates, regulations, and policies have an impact on the cost of goods. Wages are going up, which is good, but those wage cost increases go into products that we buy every day. So the reality is everything costs more. I had a mom with 2 little kids went to McDonald's the other day, and she said it cost me an extra $12 to feed my 2 kids, and said we can't go to McDonald's anymore. So, you know, it used to be that I'd say that we didn't really think that much about going to McDonald's 1 or 2 times a week, but now the reality is people are choosing not to, and they're buying Hamburger Helper instead of maybe going and enjoying a hamburger or eating out with their kids, and you know, that's the real consequences of this kind of policy. I
was on a Watertown Airport Board meeting yesterday, Governor, and during the marketing portion of that meeting, one of the airport board members talked about state dollars that are coming to South Dakota's essential air service airports, of which Watertown, of course, is one of those, $200,000 to market Watertown Regional Airport. Now, I know during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just crushed the aviation industry, caused many, many problems. I would guess that you're supportive of these marketing dollars and smaller regional airports like Watertown to be able to market their service to customers out there.
Yeah, that was in our budget last year. Last year we passed that at the state level. It was state dollars that are in our Governor's Office of Economic Development that was to help some, I think, 5 airports in the state to market. We haven't had any airports request that money until lately. I think, you know, that money sat there for a while, so if Watertown can use it to market the airport, I think that's a great thing. So the fact that they're utilizing that is important because those dollars have just been sitting in an account waiting for an airport to tap into them.
You last week issued an offer, I'll call it, to 4,000 Los Angeles County law enforcement officers to come to South Dakota rather than potentially risk losing their jobs due to vaccination requirements out in California. That's interesting. South Dakota has been a landing spot for a lot of law enforcement officers looking for a little bit of a change in where they work, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think what our law enforcement stands for is a lot of values that South Dakota has. So these people that find a government that's mandating to their lives, if they want to live somewhere people respect them, we want to welcome them to South Dakota. There's no better community members, families, people that I want as neighbors than law enforcement. So they're people that put their lives on the line every single day. If they're feeling like they don't have opportunities where they are or being penalized in their positions, then boy, come to South Dakota. We'd love to have you. We got a lot of open jobs right now, and we know a lot of folks, good people serving in law enforcement in our Department of Corrections. If they want to know they're welcome somewhere, we want them to know South Dakota's the place.
I'm guessing, Christy, when you make an offer like this, you hear from people who say, Governor, that's admirable that you're offering these people the opportunity to come to South Dakota and work. But Governor, I'm concerned that they will bring some of their political views with them. We don't want South Dakota to change. Do you hear that? And how do you reach that sort of balance?
I think I heard that quite a bit more maybe a year ago. People saw a lot of people move into the state and thought, oh my goodness, we're going to change like Arizona, Nevada, Texas, where it's a lot more of people moving in with political views that don't align with South Dakota values. I think they've learned now that that's just not our story. Our story is people aren't coming here because they're big corporations are moving them. They're not coming here for our beaches or our tropical weather. You kind of move to South Dakota because you like our way of life and the people here. So a lot of the folks that are coming to South Dakota now are people appreciate government respecting them. These law enforcement officers are some of the best citizens in the country that we know for a fact where their values are. And anybody who wants to have our way of life, I think they're finding a home here that they can be proud of and that they can tell their family members that is really a place that reminds them what it was like to have a government that respected their freedom.
We've got just a few more minutes left with Governor Noem. A couple of more questions, Governor. We're into mid-February now, and it won't be long until our thoughts and our efforts in farm country turn to spring planting. And I've been hearing more and more talk and evidence that it is extremely dry in central and western South Dakota, and that there will be drought talk going into spring planting. You have that farmer-rancher background. You talk to a lot of these people. What are you hearing?
Well, we're going to have some challenges if we don't get some moisture soon. Last year at this time, we had a lot of subsoil moisture that we could rely on and knew would be there when we put our seed in the ground, but that's just not happening right now. And especially West River, we don't have any grass to speak of, and if you don't get those rains to get that spring grass going here in the next couple of weeks, we're not going to be able to even graze cattle out there. So, yeah, we're in a significant drought, and we got to pray for some moisture, even though we don't like it to come as snow. We do need it, and remember, our number one industry in this state is ag, and what sustained us during COVID a lot was that ag was doing okay. Tourism hit it out of the park, but ag was steady, and that's what allowed South Dakota to be successful. We get into a situation where even if people keep visiting South Dakota, ag has 8 times the amount of economic impact in the state than tourism does, which is our second largest industry. So when ag suffers, it drags everything down. So nothing hits ag harder than a drought. Plus we've got supply chain issues. We've got a real lack of ability to get our fertilizer in for our farmers, and if we do, then it's a lot more expensive. Their inputs are higher. Every farmer out there knows their profit margins are going to be much tighter than they were last year. That all has an impact on how the state does and how families and their businesses are supported by ag in the coming months. So we need some rain. Everybody can pray and get together and ask the good Lord for some moisture, because, that's one of the things I always think about is special. People ask me why we have so many people of faith in South Dakota, and I say because we're all farmers, and we're all ranchers. We take incredible risks. We borrow money a lot of times and bury it in the dirt, and we hope something grows. So, we're a bunch of gamblers, really, but gamblers that rely on the Lord to follow through. So we grow people's food in this country. It's important. It's a national security issue, so let's all be united in asking God to continue to bless our state.
We'll wrap up our conversation this week with Governor Noem on the fact that you are, of course, running for a second term in office, and you recently received the endorsement from former President Donald Trump. You've aligned yourself closely with him. You campaigned on his behalf. Personally, what does it mean for you to have his support?
Well, he and I talk quite often, so we probably talk every couple of days, just because he checks in to see how South Dakota's doing, how he can help if he can, and he just was talking about people he was endorsing, and I said, well, did you know you haven't even endorsed me yet? And he said, you're kidding me, I didn't know that. So I think 20 minutes later he put it out, but it's good. His policies, he and I worked very closely on tax reform. He knows that I'm kind of a policy wonk. I like to know that what we have actually works for people out here. So, I appreciate his support. His heart is good. He's controversial in what he says, and I don't agree with everything he says, and he knows that. But he was a president that got up every day fighting for America, and boy, we could use that right now.
Governor, thank you for your time, and we will chat with you again next week.
You too, Mike. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.